An event occurred behind the scenes and you remain unaware of the entire narrative. While you were going about your days focusing on your own path, simply existing as yourself, an individual intertwined with your destiny was compelled to recognize the reality of who you are, in a manner that could no longer be dismissed. What they uncovered did not merely capture their focus. It transformed their heart. It altered the way they perceived you. It shifted how they viewed everyone surrounding them. Pay close attention, because this revelation carries great weight. Someone believed they comprehended your nature from afar. They assumed they had you fully mapped out, but the nearer they observed, the more they understood that you were entirely unlike the individuals they had previously encountered. You were not hiding behind a facade. You were not acting to gain validation. You were not declaring one thing while executing another. You were constant, authentic, sincere, in a quiet manner that defied imitation. And once they perceived that, once they truly recognized it, something within them began to separate from what no longer felt authentic. Remain with me, because the more profound reality is this. They did not sever a tie solely due to conflict. They severed a tie because uncovering your true nature illuminated what was counterfeit in their own existence. And once that brand of truth penetrates a human heart, it remains, it expands, it compels, it alters everything. So if this echoes your personal narrative, continue listening because the subsequent events reveal more than you comprehend. In the beginning, they were not seeking a massive epiphany. They were merely observing quietly and organically. They took note of the way you conversed with people when there was absolutely nothing to be gained. They took note of how you conducted yourself during challenging periods. They took note of how you remained dedicated to your core principles when it would have been far simpler to compromise, feign compliance, or mirror what the collective was doing. These were not flamboyant indicators. They were subtle occurrences, yet subtle occurrences reveal the most profound realities. Anyone can display temporary kindness. Anyone can fashion a favorable reputation when public eyes are focused on them. But authentic character manifests in consistent patterns, in repeated actions, in how an individual operates when no recognition awaits on the other side. That is precisely what they began to observe within you. Pattern following pattern, choice following choice, instance following instance. Gradually, the portrait became unmistakable. They started to comprehend that the person you appeared to be was precisely the person you were. That impacted them more profoundly than they anticipated, because internally they had become accustomed to instability. They had grown used to conflicting indicators, partial realities, calculated phrases, and unfulfilled commitments. Yet with you they continuously witnessed congruence. Your words aligned with your deeds, your vitality aligned with your core. Your essence felt identical up close as it did from a distance. And that specific kind of authenticity is exceptional, highly exceptional. If you have ever questioned whether your genuine nature carries weight, receive this clearly. It carries more weight than you comprehend. Occasionally your truth is advocating for you in environments you have never physically entered. There may have been individuals in their circle discussing you, passing judgments, distributing fragments of details without possessing the complete narrative, cultivating concepts based on speculation, envy, anxiety, or their own narrow perception. For a brief period, your person might have paid attention, not because they desired to oppose you, but because when individuals experience uncertainty, they frequently search beyond themselves for clarity. That occurs. However, the more they monitored you firsthand, the feebler those external voices grew, because truth gains power when it undergoes scrutiny. The closer they inspected, the more difficult it became to accept anything that failed to align with what they were genuinely witnessing. This is the precise juncture where the entire situation began to transform. They were no longer measuring you against hearsay. They were measuring hearsay against reality, and reality consistently triumphed. They witnessed stability. They witnessed substance. They witnessed a form of internal integrity that felt no obligation to validate itself every 5 minutes. Once that understanding took root, it began to influence more than just their perspective of you. It began to influence their entire inner landscape. Suddenly, particular discussions in their life began to feel superficial. Particular individuals appeared theatrical. Particular attachments began to feel burdensome rather than comforting. This is the function of truth. It establishes a stark contrast. It reveals what previously hid in plain view. Thus, without any deliberate strategy, they began evaluating everything through a different lens. The individuals they permitted close, the connections they were nurturing, the narratives they had blindly embraced. Every single time they contemplated your essence, one specific thought persisted like an reverberation they could not stifle. This individual is authentic. Continue listening because that realization initiated a profound chain reaction. The more they understood that your character was completely genuine, the more uncomfortable alternative areas of their existence became. Not in an instant flash, not in some theatrical cinematic display. Quietly, gradually, but irresistibly, they began contemplating more deeply the individuals surrounding them, analyzing who truly supported their elevation, and who merely preferred the iteration of them that remained restricted, bewildered, or simple to direct. They began raising queries they had sidestepped for far too long. Who embodies honesty? Who embodies depletion? Who is present out of genuine affection? And who is present out of mere repetition? Who speaks vitality into my being? And who keeps me rotating in cycles that no longer accommodate my tomorrow? These were by no means simple queries. They held massive importance because the conclusions were destined to alter things. Somewhere internally, they recognized this. What they learned regarding you was not merely educating them about your identity, it was educating them about their own criteria, their own requirements, their own tomorrow. They began to perceive that certain attachments in their sphere were persisting on routine, not genuine alignment, persisting on ease, not reality, persisting because it appeared simpler to grip tightly than to acknowledge the period had concluded. If this message is reaching your heart, remain with me because this is the component numerous individuals overlook. Massive conclusions do not invariably commence with clamorous confrontations. Sometimes they commence with silent illumination. An individual simply opens their eyes to what they can no longer pretend not to see. That is precisely where your soulmate was migrating. With every fresh realization concerning you, the historical justifications in their life began to crumble. They were becoming more conscious, more transparent, and less inclined to persist in labeling something satisfactory, when deep within it no longer resonated as correct. There was an individual in their life throughout this duration. An individual whose position had become comfortable. An individual they had maintained nearby, not necessarily because the connection was profound, but because it was familiar, anticipated, simple to revert to, an attachment anchored more in habit than genuine tranquility. For a period, they persisted in moving through that routine as though nothing had transformed. They still presented themselves, still performed the designated part, still endeavored to maintain normalcy, yet normalcy was already fracturing within their interior. Every instance they reflected upon your genuine nature, the divergence became more challenging to disregard. What felt authentic with you made what felt manufactured elsewhere appear significantly more pronounced. It was not a matter of perfection versus imperfection. It was a matter of reality versus emptiness. It was a matter of transparent vulnerability versus emotional convenience. The individual they ultimately disconnected from might not even have comprehended what was transpiring initially, because from an external view everything can appear unaltered while an entire interior universe is undergoing reconstruction. But inside your soulmate, the separation was expanding. Discussions that previously felt significant began to sound redundant. Vitality that previously felt comforting began to feel exhausting. Patterns they used to tolerate began to feel impossible to justify. They were not searching for defects. They were not attempting to manufacture a conclusion. In truth, a piece of them desired to evade transformation entirely because transformation is difficult. Severing ties is difficult. Acknowledging that an arrangement has expired is difficult. Yet truth operates on its own timeline. It does not pause for convenience. It surfaces when it surfaces. And once it settles within, it requires transparency. Night after night, reflection after reflection, they sat with a reality they were not entirely prepared to express audibly. Something in their existence no longer corresponded with the person they were developing into. That is when the internal friction intensified. They re-evaluated discussions. They analyzed historical patterns. They questioned why specific interactions left them feeling drained, diminished, or isolated. They asked themselves whether they were maintaining devotion to an attachment that had already forfeited its essence. They asked whether they were holding fast because of genuine affection or because of mere familiarity. That specific question transformed everything, because once an individual commences asking that with transparency, the solution begins presenting itself gradually at first. Then simultaneously, they started recognizing that certain individuals had merely suited the historical iteration of them, the iteration that permit misaligned dynamics, disregarded inner knowing, and lingered too long where reality was absent. But they were transforming now. The more they transformed, the less that historical connection made sense. This is precisely what uncovering your identity ignited within them. Valor, not ostentatious valor, not reckless valor, genuine valor. The kind that assists an individual in speaking the truth to their own reflection first. The kind that declares, I cannot persist in feigning that this still resonates as correct. The kind that confesses, I have advanced past this even if severing the tie causes pain. If you are still present, listen to this section intently. They did not arrive at the conclusion in a singular wave of emotion. They reached it through numerous quiet instances of illumination. That frequently renders a conclusion even more resilient, because when an individual has taken the period to contemplate, experience, contrast, analyze, and still arrives at the precise same reality, that reality becomes impossible to brush aside. By this point, the query was no longer should I acknowledge this. The query had become, how much longer can I persist in disregarding what my core already recognizes? That is a formidable state to attain, because once someone arrives there, movement is imminent. Ultimately, they attained the threshold where feigning became more burdensome than transparency. There may not have been a singular theatrical dispute. There may not have been disloyalty in the transparent definitions. There may not have been some cataclysmic rupture everyone could reference and explain. What transpired was more profound than that. Illumination arrived, unadulterated, constant illumination, the variety that does not shout yet completely alters a destiny. They grasped that the attachment they were gripping no longer mirrored the person they were developing into. It no longer accommodated the criterion that was elevating within them. Regardless of how much remorse, hesitation, or grief accompanied the realization, they could not erase the knowledge. So they made a determination, a challenging one, a silent one, an indispensable one. They disconnected from someone not because it was simple, not because they took pleasure in wounding another, not because they desired disruption, but because truth had ultimately grown more potent than convenience, and when they executed this, they experienced something unpredicted. Release. Not immediate ecstasy, not revelry. Release. The variety that surfaces when internal friction begins to quiet down. The variety that surfaces when an individual ultimately halts fighting what they already comprehend. That release held meaning. It verified to them that they had not executed the determination out of recklessness. They had executed it out of alignment. Once that vacancy materialized, emotional vacancy, mental vacancy, spiritual vacancy, they began reflecting on you even more intensely. Not in a frantic or careless manner, but in a significant manner. Because with the fragmentation cleared away, your essence stood out even more transparently within their heart. Retain this memory. The individual they surrendered was never the authentic focus of this narrative. The focus was an awakening. The focus was the reality they uncovered through your existence. The focus was the moment your authenticity compelled them to evaluate every counterfeit element they had been tolerating. Following that conclusion, they stepped into a completely alternative period within themselves. A more silent one, a more profound one. The clamor surrounding them began to recede. With that stillness arrived comprehension they had been sidestepping for an extensive duration. They began to perceive how frequently anxiety had dictated their determinations. Anxiety regarding transformation. Anxiety regarding forfeiting what was familiar. Anxiety regarding making an incorrect step. Anxiety regarding separating from an arrangement simply because it was not completely correct, even if it was no longer completely incorrect. But once those anxieties were unmasked, they began losing strength. Because anxiety operates most effectively in obscurity, and truth introduces illumination. Your soulmate started comprehending that what they discovered within you was not flawless execution. It was something significantly more formidable. Integrity, stability, an individual whose internal universe and external universe were not actively conflicting. That reacquainted them with what they genuinely desired for themselves. It reacquainted them with the kind of existence they desired to construct, the kind of partnerships they desired to select, the kind of transparency they desired to embody. This is precisely why your influence penetrated so deeply. You did not compel them. You did not pursue them into transformation. You simply remained dedicated to your own nature, and your truth materialized as a mirror that revealed what was lacking, a mirror that revealed what was achievable, a mirror that revealed the division between mere survival and authentic living. If this message is resonating with your spirit, remain until the conclusion because this component holds meaning. Frequently, the most formidable impact is not vocal counsel. Frequently, it is simply the essence of someone authentic, someone who reacquaints another individual with the fact that reality still exists. And once someone experiences that brand of reality, they cannot continue settling for what resonates as superficial. As time advanced, they ceased inquiring why this occurred and began inquiring what they were intended to execute with it. That represented the subsequent primary transformation, because consciousness by itself does not revolutionize a life. movement does. They had already executed one challenging determination by surrendering an attachment. But now they were being requested to venture even deeper, to alter the method of their thinking, to alter what they tolerated, to alter how they reacted when something resonated as incorrect. The historical patterns no longer accommodated them. The historical justifications sounded fragile. The historical fragmentations lost a portion of their allure. Step by step they became more transparent with themselves. They perceived how frequently convenience had masqueraded as tranquility, how frequently familiarity had masqueraded as genuine affection, how frequently anxiety had masqueraded as rationale. And once they perceived that transparently, it was impossible to retreat. You require to comprehend this. What they uncovered regarding you did not merely cause them to respect you. It shook them awake. It caused them to recognize they had been settling in implicit manners they never completely identified, settling for instability, settling for emotional incomplete measures, settling for attachments that appeared secure on the surface but resonated as vacant underneath. Now that their eyes were unsealed, they could not compel them closed once more. This is where authentic revolution commences, not with illusion, not with reveries, not with idealistic thinking, but with transparent vision, with internal reality, with the determination to cease betraying what your core already recognizes. Thus, every fresh day, every silent contemplation, every recollection of your vitality continuously directed them back to the identical comprehension. You did not enter their consciousness to amuse them. You entered it to reposition them. Whether they anticipated that or not, it was transpiring. They additionally began to comprehend that your influence was not centered on outward displays, tracking, or superficial allure alone. It was centered on what your essence represented: reality, sincerity, an uncommon kind of emotional alignment that pierced through bewilderment. The more they contemplated you, the more they recognized they were not merely stirred by who you are, but by what you ignited within their interior. You reacquainted them with their own profundity, their own principles, their own requirement for something transparent. That is precisely why the uncovering impacted so intensely. It brushed against something already lingering to be recollected. Once recollected, it could not be dismissed from memory. They began evaluating their entire existence through a more pristine perspective. Their routines, their limits, their criteria, their tomorrow. They could now perceive that remaining bound to what was no longer aligned would merely postpone the existence they were genuinely destined to construct. This did not render everything effortless instantaneously. Elevation is seldom orderly. Certain days introduced tranquility. Certain days introduced hesitation. Certain days introduced grief for what had concluded. Yet even through the fluctuations, the more profound reality remained constant. They had transformed, genuinely transformed. The iteration of them that once disregarded warning indicators, excused emotional emptiness, and misidentified routine as authentic connection was dissolving. In its space materialized someone more conscious, more perceptive, more prepared to select truth, even when truth demanded deprivation first. If you are still moving with me, do not overlook this phrase. Occasionally, the rationale an individual departs from one attachment is not because alternative individuals requested it of them. It is because an alternative individual's genuine nature provided them the valor to ultimately acknowledge what was already expiring. That is the more profound narrative here, and that narrative is still actively presenting itself. Currently they stand in a space where bewilderment cannot govern them the method it once achieved. The clamor is more silent. The illusions are feebler. The justifications do not operate like they used to. They recognize that authentic connection is not constructed on convenience. They recognize that reliance cannot be substituted by routine. They recognize that emotional alignment carries more weight than familiar patterns that no longer nourish the soul. As these realities grow more potent within them, so does the significance of what they uncovered regarding you.